Today, I would really like to throw some perspectives in the air. I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate and go against the norm and go ahead and defend our fellow Muslim citizens. The world is in the center of chaos ever since 9/11, and I think it's important that we analyze the outcome and acknowledge that Americans are not the only victims. And no, I am not saying what happened to the 3,000 Americans that died was fair, but what I am saying is that it is unfair to generalize a mass public and announce a unified perspective when out of the 1.6 billion Muslims, only 0.00625% are terrorists. That is less than 1% of 1.6 billion people. Regardless, we need to begin to understand how the media has depicted Muslims and how we are accepting this depiction. I want to first begin with a recap of the 9/11 events as written from Natalie Smith with Scholastic News Online. She goes to say, on September 11, 2001, terrorists attacked the United States. They hijacked 4 airplanes in mid-flight. The terrorists flew 2 of the planes into the 2 skyscrapers at the World Trade Center in New York City. The impact caused the buildings to catch fire and collapse. Another plane destroyed part of the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. The 4th plane crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Officials believe that the terrorists on the plane intended to destroy either the White House or the U.S. Capitol. Passengers on the plane fought the terrorists and prevented them from reaching their goal. In all, nearly 3,000 people were killed in the 9/11 attacks. The entire world was affected by this event. We all got to witness the events through news outlets on the internet or on the TV. This is something that affected us all dearly, and it changed the way we lived our lives on a day-to-day basis through flying to another city, visiting America, or even just going on vacation with the upscale security that has been provided in airports ever since. Since the group's creation by bin Laden in the late 1980s, Al-Qaeda has helped coordinate and fund numerous bombings worldwide. I'd like to acknowledge certain words that she used within this article. I want to present to our audience that the group Al-Qaeda practices an extreme version of the religion of Islam. This is not the religion of Islam. Their perspective and their practices, their beliefs and morals are a version of Islam that is pushed to the extremes. I want us to acknowledge that Al-Qaeda is not a representation of an entire culture or religion. It is simply a representation of a perspective of a leader, Osama bin Laden, who has pushed the extremes of Islam. We then begin to analyze how America responded to 9/11. Natalie Smith says, in October 2001, the U.S. and its allies invaded Afghanistan where Al-Qaeda was based. The extreme Islamic group that ran Afghanistan's government, known as the Taliban, was protecting bin Laden and allowing Al-Qaeda to run training camps in the country. U.S.-led forces soon brought down the Taliban. They are still working to help rebuild and stabilize the nation. Since 2001, many Al-Qaeda members have been captured or killed. On May 1, 2011, U.S. troops killed bin Laden where he was hiding in Pakistan. The U.S. invaded Iraq in 2003. Then President George W. Bush and other U.S. leaders believed that the country's dictator, Saddam Hussein, was hiding terrible weapons that could be given to terrorists. Hussein was captured and later put to death by an Iraqi court. No weapons of mass destruction were found. So her choice of words here are very comforting. I want to remind us that Natalie Smith is an author through an article that is presented to the public through the mass media. This is an accepted perspective by the United States government and our media outlets. She okays the actions and comforts our thoughts and our actions and our intentions by making a specific line apparent. She says, I quote, "They are still working to help rebuild and stabilize the nation." Yes, we have to understand that the nation of Iraq was in great despair and they were in a lot of trouble, and we were called to help them, and we, being a free country and more privileged country, it is our duty to help them. However, rebuilding and stabilizing the nation did not start with the mistakes of Iraq and Afghanistan. The mistakes started with our invasion and with our terrorism being a part of the destruction of Iraq and Afghanistan. The way the media has chosen its choice of words in this article is a prime example of how they want us to view the religion of Islam. It chooses specific words that portray Americans and their soldiers and their intentions as heroic and very savior like. The media does not provide an explanation of the opposing side's story. By doing this, they allow the imagination of their audience to run wild off of the assumption that the Americans and the soldiers who invaded those countries were heroes, and when there is a hero, there can only be one other side, an enemy. As an audience, we need to understand an attack and a defense in order to understand the events that occurred after 9/11. The Americans noted their actions as a defense line from their attacks that have occurred throughout the United States of America. Unfortunately, though, when we understand the actions of the soldiers of the United States of America, we understand that them themselves were terrorists of attack because of the invasion of the country. To invade a country means that we were unwelcomely entering a country against the country's wishes. How the United States of America has grown to be the terrorists from the war to Donald Trump is unbelievable. The ongoing war and the thousands of lives lost, the children, the humiliating tortures are unbelievable. Introducing a death count and the humiliation of Abu Ghraib prison is something that clarifies the unjust actions of the United States of America, even though the media has failed to portray these actions as unjust but instead as heroic. The people of Iraq have paid the debts of the people of Al-Qaeda. Innocent children, women, and men who have nothing to do with Al-Qaeda or their views are now being. These innocent people of Iraq are the debt payers of the actions of Al-Qaeda. Some of these people are the farthest thing from extremists, which brings me to my next point, the acknowledgement of defining terrorists. What is a terrorist? Today, if we ask the majority of Americans what a terrorist is, they will follow the associated definition the media provides to us and say a Muslim, when indeed a terrorist is not a Muslim. A terrorist is a person who uses terrorism in the pursuit of political aims. This definition is faintly similar to the political leaders of the United States of America. It sounds similar also to the political campaigns provided by their soon-to-be president, Donald Trump. Donald Trump actually meets this definition far closer than the 1 billion Muslim civilians who are not terrorists. Please take a second and allow yourself to analyze what terrorism has come to in today's society. Today's society's definition of terrorism has greatly been driven by our media. Our media has defined a Muslim as a terrorist to a point where it has been instilled in our thought process to accept this depiction. But allow me to introduce the many terrorists who are not Muslims. Let's fall back to our definition of a terrorist. A terrorist is a person who uses terrorism in the pursuit of political gains. Okay, so what is terrorism? We are going to break this down as basic as we can so we are understanding a simple aspect of terrorism. Terrorism is the use of violence and intimidation in the pursuit of political aims. Donald Trump, the future president of the United States of America, is the ringleader of intimidation. He arouses the emotions of the United States of America. He encourages a hateful, aggressive manner and produces it amongst his people to motivate his people to turn against each other, and most commonly, white Americans against anyone who may appear to be an immigrant, regardless of their American-born citizenship. He has encouraged hate towards Mexicans, Africans, and most directly Muslims. Muslims who he has reminded the public are not to be seen as anything more than terrorists, because all Muslims are terrorists, according to him, and all terrorists are Muslim. This is what he has used the media to define Muslims as and gather his supportive team. Let's be clear. A terrorist can be a Muslim, just like they can be an American, a Canadian, a Mexican, an African, and even a European. But a Muslim does not have to be a terrorist. Nowhere in the Quran does it promote hatred. Instead it reads, "Humanity is but a single brotherhood, so make peace with your brethren." Quran 49:10. It is the extremists of this religion who challenge the proper interpretation and manipulate it in order to make their needs louder. Again, I remind us that there is always an alternative route to conclusion that does not involve violence, but for extremists of any religion, things are taken way too far similar. This occurs not only in just the Islamic religion, but it also occurs in Christianity a long time ago, long enough for people to have forgotten. And just like Christians have changed, so can Muslims. But what we need to remember is that it wasn't all Christians back then, and it's not all Muslims right now. Extremists of any religion can always take things way too far. But the media has gone too far with depicting an entire religion with a single perspective that is illustrated from, once again, I remind you, less than 1% of a religion. The hatred the media continues to breed through our backlash and the publication of specific visuals through our media outlets, such as the TV or the internet, will not solve anything. The wars the corporations and the media endorse will not save any lives. We must alter our reaction and our thought process and assess ourselves as human beings. We could be born any color in the world, but what is important to acknowledge is we are all human, and every single life should be respected with love, peace, and empathy. I repeat the Quran one more time. Humanity is but a single brotherhood, so make peace with your brethren. This line applies to the extremists in our world and to those who claim to defend but are active terrorists themselves. Just like those extremists of Al-Qaeda, the American government, with their soldiers and their invasions, have become extremists as well. Something has to be done indeed, but if you fight fire with fire, you will just get fire. Millions of people who fled their homelands to escape such extremists may now be forced back into the arms of danger for no reason. They could be model citizens, but because we've implemented this stigma of Muslim and terrorist correlation, we are told to believe that they are all bad people, the children, the elderly, and the hardworking men who strive the longest hours to support their families and keep them safe. Why is it okay for one person to feel safe, but another must fear their beliefs, morals, and practices because what should be sacred and beautiful is now a target for death, humiliation, and discrimination? Children do not see the evil behind adults. Children are not born with such horrible practices. They are raised this way, and as free people, we must also strive to free these people of hate, not breed it as well. This argument is evident throughout the humiliation of Abu Ghraib prison, where soldiers were later on charged with physical and sexual abuse, torture, rape, sodomy, and murder. All violent acts of terrorism for the political gain of our government. This was initially understood as an isolated incident, but later on exposed as regular practices amongst war prisons in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Guantanamo Bay, all under the administration of George W. Bush. If we want to consider ourselves not terrorists, we must separate ourselves from these actions. Otherwise, we are no better. We are worse because we felt the pain of 9/11, and our reaction was to enforce the same pain on others, innocent others. Muslims around the world are victims, just like the 3,000 Americans who lost loved ones in the tragic 9/11 events. We've generalized their line of thought and branded an entire culture consisting of over 1.6 billion people when only 0.00625% of the Muslim population are extremists who sought out to be the definition of terrorist. Even as Canadians, we abide by our media depictions that subliminally almost always correlate Muslims and terrorists. We have allowed less than 1% of a culture to tarnish the perspective of 100% of a culture. We lost 3,000 Americans on September 11th, 2001. And between 2003 and 2013, we've eliminated 174,000 civilians in combatants of Iraq. And I just use the word civilians, which includes children who know nothing about this war, and women and men who are not supporters of extremists. If punishment is all you need, then punish those who committed the crimes. Do not take the lives of thousands of innocent individuals. Two wrongs do not make a right. And in the United States of America, 57% of the 5,850 reported hate crimes in the United States are against Muslims, who most likely, again, have nothing to do with the war or extremist views. That's 3,334.5 incidents where innocent people have had to fear for their lives because of the actions of people who are strangers to them. similar to how they are strangers to the average American. You do not hear about this in the media. The media chooses and selects specific words and specific portrayals of specific people in order to continue a heroic image of the United States of America. It is important as citizens of any country to remember terrorists may be Muslim, but not all Muslims are terrorists. Allow the proper direction of the Quran that encourages peace to not be infected by hate and take over the Muslim population. Citizens of America have the power of worldwide media. Use this media and this tool wisely. The worldwide media has the power to poison our minds, words, and actions. Do not allow the hatred to spread and reach the ears of anybody who may want to act defensively, just as Americans have throughout the years. Everyone has lost too much. Americans matter, but more importantly, humans of all races and cultures matter, and that is often forgotten throughout our media depiction. Thank you for listening.